Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite you to the session on music divine. And this is just by good fortune. This session will precede another session this afternoon, which will also deal with some musicological concepts. So there's a certain continuity in these two sessions. That's the good news. The bad news is that one of our speakers has not been able to come today, Daniel Renier, who will arrive later, I believe. So we have one speaker, there's Eleonora Falini, and she's going to be speaking on an important writer of the end of antiquity and influential during the medieval period, Marcianus Capella, and her title is hypnologein to ἐγέρσιμοv, Philosophy, Ritual, and Satire in the beginning of the De Nuptiis Philologiae at Mercurii of Marcianus Capella. So, Eleonora, please take it away.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you, Professor Gersh. So, as you can see, I am alone today, but I promise I will, I will stay in half an hour. Maybe there will be a little more time for questions, answers, discussion, and I would be really happy if you have any kind of observation, correction, because it's a privilege for me to share my research with such an audience. I'm a PhD and here to learn and study. So please, after this presentation, let me know if there is anything that comes to your mind, and I will probably add it in my future research. So the title actually now is a little bit different from the brochure. Is not υμνολογεῖν or υμνολογεῖν anymore, but is gymnologizzein to ἐγέρσιμον, and it is not an accident. It's because in the process of the preparation for this presentation, I finally went for this option, and you will understand why and how. So, what will be this presentation about? The presentation aims at proposing a new exegetical interpretation of the notable expression υμνολογεῖν to ἐγέρσιμον, employed by Marcianus Capella in the prologue of the De Nuptiis. The term ἐγέρσιμον appears again in the ninth and final book, and this time will be transliterated in Latin, in recomposition with the prologue. The paper will examine the extremely limited number of literary precedents of the term, the various interpretations proposed by modern scholars in recent decades, to conclude with a new hypothesis grounded in the re-evaluation of Theocritus as a literary source. So, a crucial aspect in Marcianus Capella's literary operation is the choice of satura, as the unifying glue that binds together the diverse contents and literary genres staged throughout the work. Prose and poetry, fabula and encyclopedia, religion and philosophy. This is not merely a stylistic choice of convenience, but rather a deliberative device, a rhetorical sleight of hand, that enables the author to communicate with the reader on multiple levels of meaning. The Nuptiae are an allegory, and as such, every word chosen by the author requires a hermeneutic approach, sensitive to the richness of Marcianus' subtext and literary sources. In contrast with the dominant influence of 5th century Christianity, the 9 books are pervaded by pagan elements, which are regularly evoked, implied, or subtly suggested. Therefore, the De Nuptiis demands a pagan exegesis, one inspired by the dogmata of classical paideia and by a kind of faith, let's say, in philology, set against the historical backdrop of the decline of gymnasia, which are now diruta, as Marcianus himself states. Philosophy and Paideia, which significantly appear together at the beginning of Book 6, are shown to be mutually necessary for the redemption of new generations, pointing toward an intellectual salvation and cultural awakening, an ἐγέρσιμον, that offers an alternative path to the prevailing Christian doctrine. Alternative, not counter line. Two Greek terms, Martianus' own neologisms, used in succession and set in antithetical relation in the prologue of the work, offer a paradigmatic case study of how allegorical, religious, philosophical, and satirical connotations may coexist within a single expression, that is, ὑμνολογεῖν to ἐγέρσιμον. So the prologue of the Nuptiis has rightly been described as an absurd opening by Schivenin. In this scene, Martianus appears as a character alongside his son, also named Martianus, and both become the protagonists of a moment rich in satirical overtones and difficult to decipher. Martianus begins to sing a hymn to Hymenaeus when his son, tired of listening to senseless blathers croaked by an old man, nugolas ineptas agarrire, interrupts him with bold irreverence. Through a cryptic smile, he compares his father to a priest, Antistes, who in an early morning blinks before the closed doors of a temple and hastens to sing hymns. Faced with the arrogance of the son, Martianus firmly replies and defines his own hymn as ἐγέρσιμον perspicui operis, an expression typically translated as incipit dell'opera perspicua by Ilaria Ramelli, opening passage by Stahl, or réveil, awakening by Schanzer. Let us now take a closer look at the two Greek terms. The manuscript tradition unanimously preserves the neologism ὑμνολογεῖν. Medieval commentators recognized its etymological connection to gymnasium, and all printed editions up to Grotius accept the original reading. However, since the term is otherwise unattested and difficult to translate, later editors tended to amend the hapax. In contrast, Preo defended the manuscript tradition, followed by Le Moyne, and believed that both characters adopt a serious tone. Martianus, the father, in this reading, behaves as an initiated poet performing the gymnastique de la raison, and his hymn would be understood as a song awakening knowledge. However, according to Cristante and Veronesi, such an interpretation fails to account for the evidently ironic tone of the son's words. As Schivenin has demonstrated with compelling clarity, the entire proemial dialogue between father and son echoes the Abstinentia by Porphyry, both thematically and textually. Porphyry describes the ritual of Egyptian priests devoted to Serapis, who perform libations of water and fire at the temple's opening. He notes that the hymn singer, υμνοδός, standing on the temple threshold, estos or anestos epitu odou, awakens the god ἐγέρει ton theon, while chanting in the Egyptian national language. In addition to that, the metaphor of libation, which also appears in Martianus' proem, Hymeneo prelibante disposita, and the motif of nocturnal vigilia, establish a further parallel between the two texts. Just as the Egyptian priests devote themselves to literary studies during winter vigils, so too do Philology and Martianus. For these reasons, Schivenin adopted Dick's emendation, ὑμνολογεῖτες, you υμνολογize, in alignment with the religious context of the Porphyrian source, thus replacing one hapax, υμνολογεῖτες, with another neologism. But what stylistic motivation could have led Martianus to coin a new word that adds no substantial nuance to the already well-attested υμνολογεῖν? The most recent contribution to this debate by Cristante and Veronesi in 2016 argues in favor of the manuscript's original lectio. They believe that the term carries an ironic undertone, alludes to vacuous Christian theological debates, and signifies senseless prattle. The same etymological root of gymnasion may also evoke Christian polemic against such pagan institutions, on the one hand viewed as licentious, and on the other stripped of their former philosophical significance. Hollowed out shells frequented by croaking philosophers, as Ambrose and Augustine well testify, on their point of view, of course. Marcianus himself addresses this decline, referring to the gymnasia of his day as ruined, as I said before, the Ruta Gymnasia in 9th book. Thus, the son's words may refer to the emptiness of his father's hymn, a sterile exercise from a decaying gymnasium culture. With a single Greek word, υμνολογεῖν, the entire Greco-Roman paideia is dismissed. Marcianus' authoritative response, however, acts as a counterpoint to reaffirm the pedagogical and philosophical value of the project he is about to undertake, the ἐγέρσιμοv perspicuii operis. Hopefully, by the end of this presentation, further arguments will be advanced in support of the manuscript reading, υμνολογεῖν. So the second Greek word in the prologue describes the proemial hymn to Hymenaeus, a Greek deverbative noun derived from ἐγέρο, meaning to awaken, rouse, stir. And interestingly, the same term ἐγέρσιμον reappears later in the ninth and final book, and this time transliterated into Latin. Harmonia has just entered the scene, holding in the right hand a kind of shield, velut clipeum, that emits a superior melody which resounds in honor of a certain secret fire, an inextinguishable flame, venerated by the gods as a transcendent intelligence. Following this evocative scene, rich in references to Neoplatonic theology, Marcianus describes the opening symphony as ineffabile ἐγέρσιμον, translated by editors as ineffabile eccitante sinfonia, again by Ramelli, stirring symphony by Stalin et al., or ineffable prelude, mystic prelude by Schanzer. But why does this expression appear first in Greek and later in Latin, in a recomposition that bridges the beginning and the end of the work, the most programmatic places of the text? To address this, it is essential to begin with the literary precedents, or rather, the single precedent in all of Greek literature. That is Theocritus' Idyll 24, the Herakliskos, or the Little Heracles. In this poem, Alcmena sings a lullaby to her infant son Heracles and wishes him to wake up from sleep the following morning. In this context, the Junctura ἐγέρσιμον ύπνος describes a sleep from which awakening is expected, in contrast to the eternal sleep of death. After Theocritus, we happen to find the next occurrence of ἐγέρσιμον 7 centuries later, in the 5th century CE, in the paraphrase of the Gospel of John by Nonnus of Panopolis, whom is probably a contemporary of Marcianus, by a time when the term had acquired the Christian connotation of resurrection. Critical debates concerning the ἐγέρσιμον, I don't have time now, I'm just giving you a synthesis, and more broadly the poem of the Nuptiis, have tended to marginalize and underestimate the Theocritean source. Only Baldwin and Suárez Martínez have drawn attention to a Theocritean precedent, though, surprisingly, not the Idyll 24, but the 18, which consists of a bridal hymn to Hymenaeus, and thus echoing Marcianus' proemial hymn. However, no study to date has focused specifically on Idyll 24, the only literary precedent, and existing contributions have only addressed the opening lines of it, where the Junctura ἐγέρσιμος ύπνος appear. This study proceeds from the hypothesis that a complete reading of the Idyll, when approached from a Neoplatonic and Marcianean, let's say, perspective, can reveal the functional role of the Theocritean source within the Nuptiis. The reference, rather than a casual allusion, appears to be a programmatic choice, intended to unlock for the good reader the true meaning of the Nuptiae. Indeed, the idyll shares several structural and thematic elements with Martianus' work and with the broader poetics of it. Just as the reference to Porphyry marks Martianus' alignment with Neoplatonic doctrine, Theocritus' idyll embodies the second soul of the marriage, that is philology. Neoplatonism and classical paideia, like Mercurii and Philologia, converge toward an ἐγέρσιμον, a pagan resurrection and philosophical awakening attainable only through study and intellectual acquisition. And I think that here maybe my presentation connects with the previous panel about AI. In order to understand the connection between Martianus and Theocritus, it is necessary to trace stylistic and thematic correspondences, assuming that Martianus' aim was to guide the reader toward the idyll and to suggest a mediated, re-functionalized interpretation. The methodology here employed will thus be to read Theocritus through Martianus' lenses. After all, Martianus himself provides explicit instruction to the reader on how to interpret the work, how to explore its deepest folds. Si vero concepta cuius caturriginis vena profluxerint properus scrutator inquiris. So already in the prologue, when he responds to his son insolence, 2 lines down from the 2 Greek terms we are now analyzing. So Martianus offers detailed allegorical descriptions within the work, accompanied by cryptic exegetical clues, but leaves it to the reader to interpret and understand them. We should then begin by analyzing the text of the idyll. Oh, is there? So the Theocritian Herakliskos retells the well-known myth of the infant Heracles strangling the serpents sent by Hera to kill him in his sleep. At midnight, Hera sends 2 serpents with fiery eyes to devour the child. But by Zeus' will, a miraculous light spreads throughout the house. Alcmena, Amphitryon, and the sleeping servants wake up, light torches, and rush en masse into the children's room, where they behold the epiphany of the young Heracles, showing the slain serpents. The next morning, Alcmena, distressed, consults the seer, my English today is not working, Tiresias, who reassures her by foretelling Heracles' apotheosis after the 12 labors and his eventual marriage to Hebe. Tiresias also prescribes a meticulous rite of expiation to free the household from the pollution of the serpents, thus concluding the first section of the idyll. The second part begins abruptly and consists of the detailed account of Heracles' paideia. The poem ends, albeit in a fragmentary state, preserved only via 1 papyrus from Antinopolis, with a hymnic section dedicated to the hero's apotheosis and his wedding to Hebe. This finale was perhaps close to an Hymenaeus, and it is worth noting that Baldwin and Suarez Martinez has previously argued that Martianus' ἐγέρσιμον was a parody not of the Herakliskos, but of Idyll 18, precisely because of the hymnic bridal context. So in the poem, it is possible to identify 3 thematic nuclei as the basis for a comparison with Martianus' work. The religious miraculous element, structured around the opposition like darkness, child, serpent, oracle, ritual, which show many overlaps with the rite philology undergoes in order to achieve apotheosis. The paideutic element, built around a curriculum of disciplines that mirror and foreshadow the labors Heracles must later undertake to earn his place among the gods. And number 3, the nuptial apotheosis between the mortal hero and Hebe, like Mercurii and the human maiden Philology. These three elements develop into one ascensional narrative, beginning in the earthly and domestic sphere, through the stages of education and heroic maturation. The poem culminates in the final apotheosis, where the human and divine realms are reconciled in a sacred wedding. Due to limitation of space, this study will focus only on the second section, devoted to Heracles' education. But even at first glance, it is possible to notice how numerous the parallels are. So, as anticipated, following Tiresias' prophecy, the scene undergoes a sudden shift. The new section opens almost ex abrupto with the list of Heracles' tutors from whom he learned the disciplines of the Greek paideia. This section is only apparently secondary, while it is intended to balance the preceding part in being primarily concerned with the mortal, earthly side of Heracles, as Stern affirms. And to achieve the apotheosis, Heracles has an equal need for both divine intervention and earthly education. That mortal element fated to burn on the pyre of Trachis at the end of his human experience, as Tiresias says. And this is the same narrative structure employed by Martianus for Philologia's apotheosis. She too must vomit forth all the knowledge that granted her access to heaven, to free herself from the last earthly bond. The disciplines Heracles acquires are in order: ladders, archery, music, the pancration, chariot racing, and the art of war. This curriculum reflects the traditional program of Greek paideia, later systematized and refined by Plato in the Republic. But when outlining the ideal educational path for the guardians of the Callipolis, Socrates asserts that music and physical exercise represent the traditional education, while in the new curriculum, music will precede all other teachings. Indeed, while philosophical instruction requires intellectual preparation of the soul, music provides an education that is not merely rational, but ethical, mimetic, and psychagogic. At first glance, the ideal appears not to follow Platonic dictates, placing grammata in the first place before music. Yet, the didactic list is not so straightforward or devoid of implications. In fact, Heracles' master of ladder is Linus, son of Apollo, a hero who kept sleepless watch over him, the legendary figure traditionally associated with music teachings, about whom little is known, but that he was the teacher of Orpheus, Homer, and Heracles. What matters here is Theocritus' programmatic choice, thoroughly Alexandrian in taste, to foreground philology and the study of grammata in place of music, a substitution made even more striking by the improper assignment of this subject to the music teacher par excellence. The figure of Linus was well known to Martianus, who cites him at paragraph 212, yes, is there. Linum Homerum Antuanumque vatem, redimitos canentesque conspiceres. No, there is like a curriculum of wise men, and Linus is there, and places him among the souls of the ancient blessed who earned the temples of heaven alongside Homer and Virgil. The curriculum of the wise thus proposed Linus as an emblematic figure, mentioned first and together with the two vates who symbolize Greco and Latin culture. His name seems to invoke an even older ancestral past, that is the dimension of myth. But for Martianus, as a reader of Theocritus, this variatio in Theocritus could hardly go unnoticed, as well as the programmatic meaning of the choice. As Thomas observes, the evolution of Linus into a man of letter in Theocritus is poetologically significant. In learning grammata, Heracles functions like a Hellenistic scholar. Linus is, in a sense, a Xenodotus, Callimachus, or Apollonius, at the head of a list of teachers of a naturally transformed and modernized Heracles. Theocritus adapts the traditional paideia to his own times by aligning the traditional curriculum with the new demands for erudition, increasingly tied to written form and bookish knowledge. This operation is precisely the same Martianus Capella performs in his work. The Nuptiae, in fact, represent an encyclopedic attempt to update the liberal arts and to reconnect the theoretical and practical dimension of their study, philosophy and philology. Oops, no, not yet. So the second ἐγέρσιμον, the unprecedented Theocritian association between philology and music, between the study of letters and the harmonic discipline, creates a new bridge between the idyll and the nuptiae, which may perhaps contribute not only to our understanding of the two Greek terms of the prologue, but also to the ἐγέρσιμον of the ninth and last book, book 9. Martianus' choice to pose music at the end, rather than at the beginning of the curriculum, contrasts with the traditional order transmitted not only by Plato, but also by Varro, whose auctoritas he repeatedly invokes. Music, moving from a preparatory role for philosophical learning, assumes a crucial position at the culmination of the educational path. The choice of harmony rather than music to expound the musical doctrine transcends the technical aspect, since the Virgo allegorically represents the harmony of the cosmos. By the 5th century CE, after the materiality of knowledge as disseminated through libraries and the creation of textual corpora had become indispensable for the preservation and teaching of philosophy, philology had become the true philosophy. In the prologue to Book 6, before discussing the arts of the quadrivium, Martianus admits to no longer recognize the two eclectissime feminae that precede geometry, philosophy and paideia. He intentionally places them side by side to emphasize how both had become alien to his era and to affirm the ultimate aim of his work, to reintroduce philosophy through the study of paideia, for contemporaries and future generations alike. Praxis goes hand in hand with theory, the earthly world with the divine, and the reunification of these two worlds is accomplished by philology, the new philosophy, also through music. Martiano provides his contemporaries with a practical tool, a condensed encyclopedia, designed to train and guide the soul. But it is not all. There is no overt theoretical mediation between the reader and the text. Martiano leaves clues within the text, but the exegetical work is the reader's responsibility alone. In an age when the lights of reason, the lucernas marcescentes, were waning, the author does not merely epitomize, simplify, and organize the disciplines, but creates a new literary genre. Martiano is the philologist at work that recovers Greek and Latin sources to incorporate them into the text in a dense composite, a satura, with an equally intricate subtext. The proficient reader is one capable of reconstructing the complex mosaic of intertextual references, that is, the philologist. The proemial reference to Theocritus concretely exemplifies this exegetical dynamic established by Martianus with his audience. The position of the citation is programmatic. For the reader, the idyll could serve as an introduction to the nuptiae, presenting in nuce the various thematic nuclei that unfold within the 9 books. The pagan rite, interpretable through Neoplatonic lenses. The traditional paideia, reactivated and understood as philology. The apotheosis and reunification of the human and divine worlds through the overcoming of earthly labors. The 12 labors faced by Heracles correspond to the 7 liberal arts, reorganized by Martianus in ascending order from the most terrestrial to the most celestial. After Plato, the advent of philology caused a turning point, of which Theocritus already showed full awareness in the idyll. Letters had become the new psychopoietic instrument capable of transforming the soul. Now even philosophy, theurgy, divinatory arts, and magic were transcribed onto the page. By Marcianus' time, this process had reached its ultimate consequences. In the Latinized, Romanized, and increasingly Christianized society of North Africa, when the study of Greek had lost practical relevance, the perennial Greek ἐγέρσιμον sounded almost completely meaningless. Nonsense croaked by an old man. Only in the book 9, at the end of the ascensional journey throughout the 7 intellectual labors, did the reader-disciple rediscover the ἐγέρσιμον, but this time in Latin characters. This transliteration encapsulates the profound meaning of the Nuptiis. The classical curriculum, transmitted by the Greek tradition, is not simply replicated, but reorganized and adapted to the contemporary historical context. The ἐγέρσιμον, the awakening, must now speak Latin. In Book 9, the word does not refer to a mere musical harmony related to Neoplatonic theology, as Scheveningen has theorized, for example, but is a programmatic, philosophical, paidetic continuation and completion of the perennial ἐγέρσιμον in Greek. After the exhausting philological journey throughout the 9 books, the reader comes to the conclusion of the work profoundly transformed and educated. Marcianus acts as a psychopomp until this moment when harmony appears on the scene and intones her song, a fitting conclusion to the labors. Her shield is not meant for battles, labors, or war, just as the overturned shield that cradles Heracles in the idyll was not, but to produce a divine and ineffable sound with transformative power. The apotheosis of philology is achieved thanks to the guidance of Mercurii, god of hermeneutic and quintessential psychopomp. The reader instead must first delve deeply into the labyrinth of Marcianean and perhaps Marcian subtext, the only sacred cave where we can rediscover the instruments for ascension, the classical Greek and Latin sources. Plato defines the curriculum's disciplines as parakletika, kaigertika tes dianoias, capable of stimulating and awakening the intellect, and this is the model for the ἐγέρσιμον of Marcianus. Classical paideia aimed at educating through gymnastic and music, while Plato identifies dialectic as the sole science able to encompass all others. The caves described in the Nuptiis are now deserted and abandoned. Apollo and Harmony have left the world and are exiled in heaven due to human ingratitude. Marcianus' son accuses him of υμνολογεῖν, of speaking an obsolete gymnasium language, whereas stale paideia continues to echo in the increasingly empty classrooms of the 5th century. The son's ironic accusation encapsulates a critique of all the foundations of traditional paideia in a single verb. Υμνολογεῖν is composed of gymnastic, music, and calculation. Gymnastike, ύμνοι, and logismos, logizēin. This is why I believe that the original lectio presented by the manuscript tradition must be preserved. And now, this is the real conclusion. Marcianus' response is firm and direct, but requires a philological effort that only the reader philologist can undertake. The meaning of the Greek ἐγέρσιμον cannot be understood without immediately delving into the subtext. And only after completing the full reading of the 9 books, that strange Greek term, proimial apax, will begin to speak Latin. The dual soul of the Nuptiis are discernible from the prologue by means of the sources programmatically chosen by the author, of which the 2 Greek words are signs, Porphyry and Theocritus, Neoplatonism and Philology. The second ἐγέρσιμον is the new paideia speaking Latin, yet thoroughly imbued with the Greek from which it originates, just as in the very complex language spoken by Martianus. After all terrestrial philological labors, the final leap is a harmonic catharsis, an encyclopedic choral symphony, and a divine apotheosis. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you very much, Eleonora, for that very fine paper. I'm convinced by your background textual analysis. What strikes me, though, is I wonder if you could compare the interpretation that you've very persuasively given us with Marcianus in terms of Greek sources, Porphyry and Theocritus. Compare that with the tradition of Marcianus exegesis. And you know as well as I do that Marcianus is a subject of Carolingian commentary, several Carolingian commentaries, William of Conches, Bernard Silvestris, up to, goes right up to Cusanus, still quoting Marcianus in De Doctor Ignorantia and so on. The reading, it strikes me, is basically in line with your reading, except it's much simpler because they weren't reading, none of these people were reading Marcianus against the background of the Greeks that you've highlighted. So my question is, to what extent is the medieval reading or the tradition of medieval reasoning fairly justified, and to what extent would it need to be corrected, just in summary form? What is the novelty, so to speak, of your reading in relation to that tradition?
Yes, thank you for the question. There are actually a few papers, a few articles written on the medieval reading of these two terms. Basically, the medieval commentators were just recognizing the gymnasium common root, and they were just connecting it to that, and then noticing there was a neologism, and that's it, because so they were also facing the problem of Greek sometimes. And with the ἐγέρσιμον, the article that I mentioned by Suarez Martinez is all based on the evaluation of medieval commentaries. Like, he believes that the ἐγέρσιμον was a parody, maybe of the bridal hymn of Hymeneo in Edel 18, also because the reading of Remigio d'Auxerre was noticing that probably there was not a parody, but a connection to Apuleius, and the ἐγέρσιμον was just like a ironic version of it was. Suarez Martinez believes that actually the ἐγέρσιμον is real, that the son of Marcianus is awakened by the hymn sang by Marcianus, and that's why he is mad at him. So this is a long paper, but it can make sense. He also went through the diatribe with Schiavenin for that. There are papers responding to each other about that. But yes, there is also another problem with Marcianus. The commentators were not having troubles with the weird language used by Marcianus, by the weird Greek terms in his text. While maybe after Notre, this is my hypothesis, there comes an idea of Marcianus as schreibend, a scribacchino, someone who was just copying and pasting things and sources, random sources around without really knowing Greek and reading some Latin translation of Greek sources, mistaking them, and then putting inside a very complicated and dishomogeneic work. That's why only from Grotius we found the crux with the υμνολογεῖς lectio. I think it's something ideological too. Like the medieval commentaries were just, okay, there is another of his neologisms. Okay, there is probably a reason in Apuleius, because they were very into, I mean, Ilera knows better than anyone here in the room, but there was this idea that Martianus was depending on Apuleius and Ovid Metamorphosis, but like only these two really Latin sources were highlighted. And there is a passage in Apuleius where Egyptian priests actually are mentioned, and the sources are reconnected to the context, but not specifically Porphyry. There is only one humanist philologist from Holland. There is, I don't remember the name. It was the only one who identifies Porphyry, and then after him is given in 2009. But yes, so basically the problem comes after. Once we start to see late antiquity as a period, an historical period where there was no Greek, there was no culture, and there was nothing, then we started to amend, to propose emendation and conjectures to the textual manuscript tradition. Before that, especially in the medieval commentaries, there was no problem with that. There was not a clear explanation. They were not able to find the source, but it's a different approach to Martianus' text. I don't know if I answered the question, but... In the book 9, he basically replicates Aristides word by word. Yeah, but in book 9 is based on Aristides Quintilianus, Aristothenus, Pseudo-Plutarch, the Musica, and there is only a section about monochord that is taken from a source that we don't have, and we don't know anything. Yeah.
With different works, of course, a lot of it will remain speculative. Nonetheless, he's the ancient writer with one can make those connections. And we do know that Porphyry was widely read among the Latin speakers.
That's true. But the interesting thing about Martianus' usage of sources is that he is not just like taking text, incorporating it within the Nuptiis. He sometimes changes the Greek and creates Latin neologisms to express something that the Greek, and only the Greek, was able to express. And he does this very often, and there are a lot of sources that we don't know he used. Actually, my PhD research is about the Greek sources employed by him, and it's very difficult to understand what was in Latin, what was in Greek. But sometimes you can understand that he's reading the Greek, because he's not just copying it and translating it in Latin. He's rephrasing, he's changing, like the vertere, and he's not only translating, he's trying to speak Greek in Latin. I don't know if it makes sense. It's very weird. But also here in Porphyry, he's not quoting Porphyry. He's not just translating. You can see that he doesn't have a Latin translation of Porphyry under his eyes. He's creating Greek neologisms on the basis of the Greek of Porphyry. Because he changes, he declines, he conjugates. The ἐγέρσιμοv and the ὑμνολογεῖν, they are, of course, from the context of Porphyry, but they don't appear in Porphyry. And if he doesn't know the Greek, or if he's just reading Porphyry in Latin, how could he come up with such kind of literal operation? And it is possible to do this with other sources, also with Euclid in the 7th book. Also Aristotle in the 6th, I'm reading now something about that. Music is something that we should do. I just read Egyptian papyrus about magic, and I found it the exact Greek expression transliterated in Latin in Martianus in book 2, and it's evident if you read the papyrus. But it's changing the syntax, it's changing the Greek in Latin.
Just a quick question, that Martianus Capella was popular again in the Renaissance, when people were perhaps more familiar with Porphyry. Can you say anything about his reception during the 15th century?
Oh. I'm reading a book about that we were talking about that just 5 minutes ago. Actually, I'm not I don't feel completely comfortable to answer, because I would probably say not precise things. But there is a book by Brill that is exactly about the reception of Martianus Capella after the medieval ages. So I can give you the title. It's by Brill. I bought it here last year. She knows. She gave it to me. So I can just give you the title, because it will offer a better answer than myself. Okay.
So lunch will be today in the garden, 1:30. Until that time, you can enjoy the sun and the gardens of the villa. Thank you.